So the music sales data set is something that I have uploaded in Blackboard. If you look under week 3, September 1 folder for data sets on the left panel, you'll be able to find this data set. I want you guys to open this data set and let's review this data set together before we actually start framing the problems and looking into all 9 yards of it. Okay, so here is the data set that I'm talking about. As you can see, it has multiple columns and rows to it. The first column talks about the name of the album. The next column talks about the artist, where from the artist is, which company is producing that album, who are the composers, where are they from, the album is produced where. When customers are buying them, there are specific customer IDs, specific customer emails, um, um, the genre of the specific kind of album for which you are buying it, invoice number, invoice date. Um, uh, Give me a second, let me move this. Media type, last name, postal code, specific region in which the purchase is made. And so there are multiple regions herein, and some tracks within those albums, bytes in terms of the size of the tracks, um, numbers bought, quantity bought, unit price. So all of that data is available in this data set. Okay, so the question then becomes, how do you read this data? In what ways can you read this data? And what are some of the leading questions you can ask? Sometimes it's not necessary that you have a leading indicator here, like the examples that we discussed in the last face-to-face session, where there was one leading variable and everything else led to that. It can be just a representation of the data to explain, how can you dissect this data? How can you slice and dice this data to produce some meaningful or glean some meaningful information from that data? That's the first question that we're asking. And so the natural context can be, who is this data for, Dr. B? And that is the very first question. Who is your audience? Okay, who is this data for? Is it for the composers? Is it for the singers? Is it for the production companies? Is it for the consumer base, for them to know what's going on? Or is it for the salespeople to understand how you want to sell your specific audios? And so being in line with the video game example that we just talked in the previous session, let us suppose that this is primarily around the salespeople, and the sales department is trying to garner some more knowledge off of this data in terms of patterns of sales and so on and so forth. And so the question therefore is, how can you utilize this data set to come up with some key questions based off of which you can then go about and slice and dice the data and visualize it. The slicing, dicing, and the visualization part comes later. First and foremost, you must look at the data variables in the same way we did in the last class. And you must ask the question, if this is going to be of importance to my sales people, my sales department, what is it that I can ask? What is it that I can draw information from this data? So let's talk about one question, and you have all banked on this in different forms. Okay, let's think about this as the most popular genre. Okay, which is the most popular genre? And I have done some color coding here, and let me explain the context here. The yellow leads to the green. The green is the decision point here. The green is the decision that the business will make. The yellow is the specific question from the data that we are asking and we are trying to visualize. So as an example, a most popular genre is a broad way of asking the question. If you dig deeper into it, in essence, what you're asking is to help create next year's budget. The idea is to create a visualization to determine which genre sells most to customers in a certain geographic region. Let's say it's Europe and Asia. Okay, there are multiple geographic regions that are available in the data set. Let's suppose we are concentrating on Europe and Asia, or only Europe. Okay, so the idea is to create a visualization to determine which genre sells most to customers in that certain geographic region. That will in turn help create next year's budget. So what you see in green highlight is essentially the outcome, the decision that you are trying to make off of that visualization. And that's where the connectivity is. And what I've added here is, yes, we mentioned Europe and Asia, but wouldn't it be cool if the user who is using your dashboard, your visualization tool, can actually select a specific geographic location or a subset of locations, change those choices, and see how those numbers change? Because then it becomes an interactive map with the user. So these are the powers of visualization software like Tableau. This is where Tableau is a king, because it helps you do all of these in bits and pieces. So that was one of the questions, and one of you already asked that question. Top 20, this was a very common one. This actually came from the video games report as well. Okay, so again, the yellow is what you are capturing from the data set, how you're visualizing it. The green is trying to understand or make a decision based off of that visualization. So if the first level of detail is what the most popular genre is, the next level of detail is to know which artists need to produce more albums. So a visualization that determines which artist sells the most will help you answer that question. Because if you're selling a lot in this year, the following year, it's expected that that demand will continue, and so you need to produce more. And in certain cases, if that artist is producing tracks in multiple genres, you would also want to capture that information. You would want to visualize that. That will tell you in total, a certain artist is creating the most number of albums, but those albums are distributed by its genre. So in the previous example, when you talk about the most popular genre, okay, rock, pop, metal, and so on and so forth, you are looking into trying to create the one that is the most popular. Of course, this one really doesn't tell me the story. I would rather recreate that in a descending order so that it's much more easy to understand for me, right? So that was how I would create that. In the next setup, when we talk about top 20 artists, we are trying to break this up by artist 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way till 20. And it is not necessary that artist 1 has tracks from a single genre. So the artist 1 can have tracks from 4 different genres, and together the artist produces the most. And so as long as we can capture that form of data, then it would be a gold mine for the decision makers to understand which artist needs to produce albums in which specific genre. Okay. Third question, identifying sales trends among tracks. Okay, so let's explore the visualization of sales trends between different tracks like rock, alternative, heavy metal. Okay, which one sells more than the other? And so this would allow you to perform market research along those specific tracks to check for consumer insights as an example. And again, you can break that down and group it up by demographics, by region, and so on and so forth. Again, same sales trends. This is data that's available from the data set. That's what you're visualizing, but eventually that's what you're trying to explain. Based off of that visualization, what will you do with that? You want to perform market research along those specific tracks to check for insights for in consumers, how consumers are behaving along those lines, and so on and so forth. How does regional sales compare against each other? Okay, so another visualization worth investigating is, let's say, sales by region. In this case, let's say we are talking about Europe and Asia. Okay, so what does this help? This visualization helps. It helps in understanding regions that are doing well versus regions where the numbers need improvement. Okay, so even within a certain region, if you look at the European sector, you can break this up into buckets depending on how much what those sales are. And this kind of representation is no different than the representation in which you provide the spheres in concentric circles, and the circle's size denotes the volume. Okay, so here the area denotes the volume. Let's say this country, England, in Europe, has the highest sale for that region, and this one, let's say this is Bulgaria, has the lowest sales in the Europe region. So the same thing can be captured here. This is England and this may be Bulgaria. Okay, so that capturation process helps you highlight, and you can then turn all of these lower sales nations based off of a certain threshold as your specific nations on which you want to work. Understand where you can better market the products, where you need to brand it better, where the reach out has to happen, how do you connect those dots? Because the ones that are doing well are doing well. The ones that are not doing well are areas of improvement. So that is tremendous information in the hands of the sales department, just based off something as simple as a visualization of sales by region from a single data set. Okay, so again, the yellow part essentially visualizes whatever the data set represents. The green part is where the decision comes. Okay, you always have to ask yourself, what form of decision can you make once you visualize? It's not just look at what a cool thing I have done. It's not about that. It's always asking yourself, why would somebody want to see this kind of a visualization? That why is what you see in green in each of these steps that we have discussed so far. Everything that you see in green is answering the question why you would want to see the visualization. To know which artists need to produce more albums. Again, why do you want to see the visualization? That is the answer. To perform market research along those specific tracks to check for consumer insights, to see why those sell trends are different between rock, between alternative, between heavy. Why are those things different across the base? Okay, so again, why? That answer comes from the visualization. Or it's a leading question essentially from the visualization. Ditto here. How does regional sales compare against each other? You can visualize that very easily. But why? Because then it'll allow you to understand specific regions that are underperforming, that needs improvement. Then you can start making strategies in terms of how to better market, how to brand, how to reach out, and so on and so forth. So Nick Davis asks the question, how would you discuss variables that would perhaps affect our identification of our problem? For example, accessibility of certain countries, internet access in countries, censorship in certain countries relating to some music genres. Very nice question, Nick. Again, I think you are thinking in the right direction. you are thinking in the right direction, meaning that you are thinking from the problem first and then the data. Okay, and each one of those are valid um, are valid factors that would help you identify um, whether a certain music video will be available in a nation or not. Right now, I have already given you the data set. And so this data set is what it is. And so we are kind of backtracking from the data set to capture the information based off of what is available in the data set itself. Now, if your question is in terms of whether we have data that relates to finding information on accessibility, yes, the answer is yes. It's a resounding yes. You have censorship data on countries. You have accessibility data on countries. You have internet bandwidth data on countries. So all of that data can be gathered if you want to gather data on those factors. Okay. So hopefully it kind of gives you an impression of what I mean by the green part that I have highlighted versus the yellow part. Okay, so the green part is the ultimate decision that I want to make based off of the visualization. And this is where you have the upper edge if you think this way, because you always ask the question, what would my boss do with this data? If my boss has asked me or my supervisor has asked me to visualize and provide a report, what could he do with it, or what could she do with it? And as long as you have some level of understanding of what kind of decisions could be made, you always have the upper hand of visualizing the data in exactly the way your supervisor wants it. That's when it becomes an aha moment. This was exactly what I was looking for. Thank you for doing this work. And right there, you get your raise or your promotion for the next cycle. Okay, so that's where it is important to connect the dots. Oftentimes, I have seen data analysts getting so bogged down by the data analysis itself that they don't think beyond it as to why they're doing it, what somebody else will do with their analysis. And that thought process has to be there. For those of you, and I have taken multiple classes from the Department of Statistics while I was a student, and I have seen a stark change in how people think in those departments. They are master programmers. They are master analysts. They can probably analyze a data and understand the tools to analyze the data better than what Dr. B would do. But once they've analyzed the data, they have no way to figure out what to do with that analysis. That's where the business knowledge comes in. That's where trying to get a feel of what would you do with this visualization? What kind of decisions can you make with the visualization? That is so important to comprehend. That comprehension is key. And as you can well relate, this is what week 3 of a class. We are 3 weeks into the class, and we have not really looked into crunching data yet in this class. Because as I've said it multiple times, I'll say it again, that's an easy part. The comprehension part is where the thought process has to be. That is going to bring the money for you. Crunching data, I can actually hire a data analyst. I don't need you with a business degree to crunch data for me, per se. But to make meaning out of data, yes. But to comprehend that data, to go forward and say, what kind of decisions can I make with this data? Yes. That's why I need your business degree. So that's why what we are learning from a business 612 perspective is a different approach to looking at numbers as opposed to what you would learn from a purely data analysis perspective. And then what about geographic sales distribution? Okay. So again, how does the sales picture look in countries and geographies currently catered? That is what inherently the data set will provide for you. But how do you go beyond that to expand your sales to more countries in newer geographics? Because that is what the idea of a salesperson is. It's always expansion. Okay, if you are currently working in a certain geography of the world, how do you expand that to another geography? So can someone quickly review the data set, especially the variables called regions, and tell me if something is missing. Look at the variables that is called regions. Scroll down, look at all the regions, and think about the world and ask yourself, is a specific region missing? Middle East, oftentimes Middle East has been defined as part of Asia. There is a thin line there, and it kind of gets into that sector. Australia, um, I I think yes, Australia and New Zealand may be the ones that are missing. They're down under. They're also one aspect that is not normally considered. You are only looking into a couple of nations that really represent that area. Thank you, Amy. That's a huge miss. Okay, and I don't want to go into the details of, because I have no clue where this data came from, so I don't know who created this data. I don't want to go into why Africa is being neglected, but if you look into so many of these genres, you know, from hip hop to jazz to soul, a lot of that have their origins in Africa, and so the African peninsula is a huge producer and consumer of music. And so for me, it was a glaring miss. And that would be, if I was the sales personnel, that would be my next front. And expanding sales to more countries in a newer geography. And this is where I would start looking into countries that have similar demographics like that of African nations. Okay. And something I oftentimes teach in my supply chain classes, people, not necessarily in this country, have a very wrong view about Africa as a continent. And oftentimes people can't even make a differentiation that Africa is a continent, it's not a country. Are you from Africa is a question. That's a slur, you know. You can't ask somebody that question. I can call somebody, are you from Zambia? Are you from Namibia? Are you from DRC? Are you from South Africa? You know, uh, those are specific nations that uh, that people belong from, and it is important to understand where those nations are located. What does sub-Saharan Africa means? What's the flora and fauna of that continent? So a big part of my global supply chain class is dedicated to the next frontier, that is Africa. Um, and so it is no different in what I see here from a music distribution perspective, that the continent has seen enough neglect in almost all possible resources, if you will. And that neglect shows off even in a data set like this simple one. So again, the outcome could very well be um, how to formulate that expansion of sales to newer geographics, how to find other similar nations in terms of their GDP, in terms of their average salary of people in the nation, in terms of distribution of upper class, middle class, lower class society, poverty levels, in terms of the economic profit that a country makes, in terms of the overall debt that the country has with the World Bank. And so if you can cluster certain nations and compare that with African nations, you may probably find a few checkpoints of similar African nations along with nations that are already present in this data set. And that becomes the starting point of your thought process as to these are some similar countries in terms of affordability that where the expansion of sales is possible. And so that green point, again, that questioning the why is extremely important. That is what is going to earn your bread and butter. I do not expect you to be a better data cruncher or a data analyst than somebody who has a degree in statistics. You won't compete with those people in the industry. Where you compete is this why, the comprehension of the data, the inferring from an output, trying to put it in the context of the problem. That's where you'll compete. That's where they don't have a clue, because that's not what they do. Okay. So when you put this together, here is a cool example of what a dashboard would look like. Okay, so if you look at this, it kind of elaborates all of those discussions in bits and pieces that we just discussed. The music sales dashboards, the most popular genres in Asia and Africa. Okay, so this one talks about the most popular genres, and it's arranged in a descending order. So as you can see, within the Asian and European landscape, rock is clearly the most popular one in terms of quantity sold. And then what happens from a Tableau standpoint is, if you're able to create this dashboard, you also can see that it creates, and I've created here a snapshot of it, but you can see that Asia and Europe are checked off in these boxes, and I can very well change these checkoffs and change the data set across all of these other disciplines. So in terms of sales in Asia and Europe, where the sales are, where the sales figures are, a little bit of differentiation in color coding to ensure where I am happy, where I am not, where sales have to increase. Oops, sorry. So that basically hopefully gives you an idea of what a dashboard is, but this is only for reference. What your job is to create that entire thing from scratch, whatever we just discussed. And so this is a Tableau page. And again, one more time, let me remind you, and I'm going to um, navigate to that specific part of Blackboard so that we are all on the same page here. So if you look at the data sets used in class tab to the left of Blackboard, under that you have something called Tableau prep folder. Okay, so your prep folder basically includes a link to get Tableau for students. And if you can do it by your student ID, it is a much easier deal. It actually gives you a year-long license as a student. They'll verify your ID. And so if you have not yet downloaded Tableau for your home desktop or laptop, do it ASAP because you have an assignment due in 7 days. And you have to use your Sycamore's email to register, because that way they will confirm that you are a student, an active student. And then what I have provided here is a step-by-step instruction guide with an example. This is the same example that we looked at from an Excel file perspective, but this is a Tableau file. And I have also used this in your assignment. This is in essence your first 3-point assignment. So if you go into Tableau and you open it up, it basically leads you. And this is where I like this, this format so much, because this one kind of gets your feet wet into Tableau as a software. So the introduction basically gives you a little overview of the data set, some directions. As you can see below, all of these are specific sheets like tabs in Excel. So terminology and interface is essentially where it talks about what all of those terms mean in the context of Tableau. So the workbook name, where it shows what are cards, what are shelves. So the row shelf, the column shelf, that's what those names mean. The toolbar is essentially that upper area, the view bar. And then you have something called dimensions and measures. And this is what, again, connects us back to data types, as we have studied in our discussions from the past couple of weeks. So when you talk about quantitative data, those are your measures. So when you talk about qualitative data or categorical data, the data that can be grouped, then those are your dimensions. Now, because Tableau is a smart enough tool and it also provides a lot of flexibility to an user, you can design a certain variable as a dimension or a measure. So as an example, I'm trying to think of an example here. Okay, so if you recall the bank salary data set that we discussed from the last face-to-face example, okay, or even the home pricing data set, okay. So in the home pricing data set, has neighborhood as 1, 2, and 3, right? So there are 3 different neighborhoods, and we are trying to understand which neighborhoods do pricing differently or whatever it is. So because neighborhood as a variable has data as 1, 2, and 3, it originally shows up as measures when you bring that data into Tableau. It originally shows up as measures, but then you can actually pull that specific variable as a dimension, because in reality, those neighborhoods are the 3 dimensions, 1, 2, and 3, the 3 neighborhoods. So you can actually change a certain measure into a dimension. You can build new measures. You can create new measures or new columns in the data set. You can do all 9 yards with this left column here. So that is what the terminology and interface tells you. And then everything that we have discussed so far, so the most popular genre, the top 20 artists, the sales distribution by region, sales by geography, the sales by each of those genres, rock versus alternative versus heavy metal. So all of these come in these specific um, sheets. So if I go into the most popular genre, this is what your job is. This is what your assignment is. It's simple. You already have all of this information. It is very clear directions. And when you take your cursor here, make sure that you scroll down to ensure that all the directions have been followed. You just follow the directions to the T and create those genres. The same thing has to happen for top 20 artists. There are very specific directions. You follow those directions. You create that specific spreadsheet. Sales distribution by region. Again, you look at the directions on your right, you follow those directions, and you create this. Sales by geography. Again, same thing. You have all the directions here. You just follow them, drag and drop exactly what they're asking you, and you create what we just discussed from a very broad view of a problem formulation. Rock versus alternative versus heavy metal. The only thing I'll tell you is, as you are doing this, don't wear a check rein. You guys know what a check rein is? So horses, when horses are put on a race, or even horses are driving carriages, they wear check reins. Check reins is, if you can look at me in the inset, okay, check rein is when they're wearing something that stops them from looking beyond a certain angle, because their eyes are on the side, right? So they can see a complete 180-degree view. And to keep them focused, the horses are put on check reins so that they can only see the road in front of them and nothing else. I don't want you guys to wear check reins while you're doing this. This is what Dr. B has asked to do. Let's just follow this to the T, and that is it, end of story. Then you have achieved nothing. Because this example that you are doing for me has instructions in it. The next assignment I'll give you will have no instructions. So as you are doing this, play with the software. Give it a little bit of more time. You can finish this entire exercise in exactly half an hour if you're wearing a check rein. I want you guys to give it at least an hour. So do whatever you are doing, following the instructions, but then look beyond it. Try to understand what these mean. Play with these numbers, see if you can move the variables in a different direction and see how the visualization changes. Maybe you can come up with a different approach to visualizing the data that you feel actually does a better job than what these directions tell you. Okay, so that is how you learn a software. That is how it actually makes sense for you to put Tableau on your resume. And this is what I always teach to my students, especially on the supply chain side when we are learning new software. It's a double-edged sword. It is a fantastic tool to put on your resume, but you better know how to use it, or else an interviewer will slice through you. And so ensure that you are knowing what you are learning. Okay, that requires you to put some amount of time to it. Okay, and so once all of these are done, what you see here in the final subset is a dashboard. And so all of these sheets, as you see from the bottom, most popular genre, top 20 artists, sales distribution by region, sales by geography, rock versus alternative versus heavy metal, all of those sheets can be basically dragged and dropped here. So in essence, what you'll do is you'll clean this up. I'll remove this from the dashboard. Okay. And these instructions also I can remove, and then I'll start dropping these into the dashboard to create the dashboard space, and creating something similar to what you saw in the PowerPoint that I just showed with you. Is there any way to keep, so Amy asks, is there any way to keep some of the Tableau assignments to practice in a few years to remember how to use the program? Absolutely. As you create your Tableau account, especially as a student, you'll have access to a plethora of data sets to practice on. And every time you create something, you can actually save it as a Tableau file, just like this file has been saved. And that can be saved in your PC as long as you have Tableau. And eventually, if you don't have the student account anymore, there is a Tableau online version that is free for all, as long as you sign off the fact that you can share your data with anybody. Okay, so that may not be the best option if you are using sensitive data, but if you're using sensitive data, then it's an expectation that your company has paid for the software already. But once you get the 1 year free student version of Tableau, that will ensure that you actually have the Tableau desktop installed in your PC, and you can save all of these files in the same format that this file has been saved. Okay, so this in essence is your assignment 2A, which is due next week, Tuesday by 5 p.m. And I have only 3 points for this assignment, a half point for each of these sheets, because you are basically following instructions to populate something. My 15-year-old can also do it. So there's not really too much points to give. There's no thought process here yet. We will talk about the thought process when we eventually bring back this assignment to class next week, be it face-to-face, be it asynchronous online. I haven't made the decision yet, but that's when we'll start looking back into those visualizations that you have created and start asking more questions on describing those visualizations, what they mean. Right now, I'm asking only to create the sheets and create the dashboard, not describing them at this point of time. Okay, so that's just a very simple assignment, the easiest assignment that I can give you. And then the other assignment that will come in 2 weeks from now is the Excel assignment, which will be a direct replication of everything that I have taught in the videos in Learning Module 2. So once you have gone through the videos, make sure you practice them yourselves, and then you apply it in the same exact way in the Excel assignment.